The X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you live and around the world from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network and our worldwide family of broadcast affiliates and satellite programming providers, and on Talk Stream Live. Now, if you'd like to send an email, studio@xzoneradiotv.com, and all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. Our website, www.xzoneradio.com. And of course, you can always join our Facebook group page at facebook.com/groups/X Zone Radio TV. You heard the commercial for Kevin Randall's new show coming on here at the network starting this Saturday, A Different Perspective. This Saturday night, Kevin's guest is the legendary author Jerome Clark, and Jerome is very well known throughout the UFO industry. And, you know, one of his best-selling books is the encyclopedia, the UFO Encyclopedia, of which I have a copy right here in our studio. So that is this coming Saturday, August the 20th, from 9 p.m. until 10 p.m. Eastern, the premiere of A Different Perspective with our good friend Kevin Randall. Exonation, my first guest tonight is Varla Ventura. She was introduced to the strange and the unusual at a young age. Her first game was an Ouija board, and family picnics in cemeteries were common outings. She spent most of her favorite years and formative years exploring graveyards, underground tunnels, and abandoned mansions in and around and even under Nevada City, California. She is the author of Sheroes, and a lifelong love of the true oddities inspired her to write the trivia book, The Book of the Bizarre, Freaky Facts and Strange Stories. Joining me now from, I hope not a graveyard, is Varla Ventura. And Varla, welcome to the X Zone.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. No, just I'm inside an ordinary house tonight.
Why would you go and have family outings in graveyards?
Now, that's something that, we've done since I was a very young child. So I think certainly for my mom, I don't think my mom was a particularly morbid person. I never thought of her in that way. She certainly wasn't an Addams Family type.
Right.
But she always had a certain openness to the paranormal and to the world of the occult. And so we would go to these cemeteries and we'd play around, and they just looked like beautiful parks to me. I mean, you can imagine you're a small child and you're seeing all these headstones. And we would also go to visit, family members. It wasn't, completely random, but
sure.
I just sort of grew up with this love, this appreciation for the peacefulness, and just to sort of walk around and read the names on all the headstones. And sometimes, they're just these marvelous names that nobody uses anymore. And to think about what this person's story was. And, we could play games of what do you think this Esmeralda character did when, she was a little girl, or things like that. And I found as I got older and I moved sort of out of I lived in this beautiful, idyllic little Victorian town in the foothills of Northern California. And then, of course, I grew up and I wanted to live in big cities. And I found that I would gravitate toward these cemeteries because they were a place of, they were peaceful, they were safe, they were familiar. And it's interesting because all of my siblings have a very similar relationship with cemeteries. Not all of them are nearly as weird as I am, but we all share a certain love and appreciation for sort of the history and the beauty of cemeteries.
When I was a kid, my mother used to have good friends of hers whose husband was one of the main caretakers for the Mount Royal Cemetery in Montreal, and it is basically on top of Mount Royal, and it's quite a large cemetery. And I can appreciate what you said about the peacefulness, because he had to live on the cemetery grounds, and we would play in their front yard, which was about 10 feet away from the cemetery, and I can understand and appreciate the peace, quietness, and serenity that you were talking about. Your first game was a Ouija board.
Well, I mean, probably one of our first board games. And there was one point in which my sister and I, who we're very close in age, we're less than a year apart actually, and we were kind of thinking we were going to take this Ouija board to the cemetery, but my mom got wind of that plan and quickly ended it. In fact, at one point, she eventually took the Ouija board away from us because she no longer trusted us to be able to put out whatever fires we might start with it. So, but yeah, we had quite a few experiences with that, and I had a couple of very interesting, experiences using it alone. Mm-hmm. And I don't recommend that.
Why not? Why not? Isn't it just a board with a planchette that is made in a game factory, and yet it seems to have
all it is, and yet it does seem to have this power. And it's so interesting because when you use it with other people, you always have this idea in your head of like, we know they're pushing it, we know like someone else is pushing it. And my personal experience and the times that I used it alone, one of the times I felt pretty strongly that there actually was a presence that was communicating with me. And the other time I feel like even though I wasn't pushing it, I feel like I was kind of like thinking it and sort of almost controlling it with my mind in a way, like, not that I was predicting what it was going to say, but there was something certainly happening there. And, I actually come from, a long line of, my grandmother was very psychic, and she actually was also deaf. And so she had some pretty strong abilities. Mm-hmm. And they used to do, seances and things in their kitchen, just normal thing to do. So I think there's something, there's a many layers to the Ouija board.
What was the most spooky, strange, weird, bizarre, scary thing that has ever happened to you dealing within the paranormal?
Well, fortunately, I'm not scared very easily.
All right, let me ask you this then. What would that have equated to a person who would be scared?
Probably most things.
Uh-huh.
No, I mean, I have had a couple of experiences that definitely made the hair stand up on the back of my neck.
Okay, so you are kind of normal. Okay, let's go on.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not just strolling around like hanging out with all the ghosts and just chatting it up. I mean, and I don't necessarily have the vision and the supernatural powers that so many other people do. And I'm sure you've had many guests on your show that had much more, much stronger experiences than I have. But I have had, one time I was using a Ouija board in a tunnel. sort of in the town that I grew up in, you mentioned it in the bio. There were all
Right.
these sort of mining tunnels, and then there were like these passageways where people could bring liquor during Prohibition and prostitutes during the gold rush, and all manner of things went through these
Well,
tunnels.
that probably still happens today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the restaurants actually have connections. You know,
Mhm.
you can go from one block
Yep.
to another. But you really have to know someone who knows someone to get inside those tunnels anymore.
Oh, I was talking about the liquor and the
Oh,
prostitutes.
the liquor and the
Yeah.
prostitute. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, you know, I mean, it's pretty close to Nevada, so no
How
holds
true.
barred there.
Yeah.
Great state. But yeah, I'm trying to think of like a specific, because there have been a lot of very creepy things where I've been like, okay, we need to stop this. There was one time that we were in this old mansion, and I really felt like something kind of like almost scratching on me,
Ooh.
and that to me was like it was either my imagination
Mhm.
saying, you know, okay, you've had enough, or it was something else saying, okay, now would be a good time for you to leave. So there have been a lot of situations that I've been in like that where it's never quite gotten to the point where, you know, something really catastrophic has happened because, you know, I've trusted my intuition to get me out safely.
Every time I
Um,
trust my intuition, I just get into more trouble.
well, well, you know, we might get along nicely.
Yeah, well, there you go. Friends are made
Want to
over
hang
the
out in a
internet.
graveyard?
Hey, sure, why
But
not?
one thing I think that, and maybe you'll have listeners out there who have shared this experience, but I've found, you know, the idea of the paranormal and the talking about the paranormal and ghost stories and strange tappings and all of those things that you think you hear or you do hear,
Hmm.
things that come to your door in the night, the idea of those things is much more frightening than the actual experience, at least for me. The times that I have had the experience, it's almost this sort of like matter of fact thing that is happening. It's like, oh, okay, there's someone at the foot of my bed. Oh, okay, there's something sitting, you know, and it's almost like you don't have time to process it in the moment. Then when you kind of the realization washes over you and you're home alone and you know your phone's in the other room and you're that's when you start thinking like, okay, I'm going to turn on the light. Okay,
Yeah.
what was that? And you start to apply logic to it. But in the moment, I have not had an experience where I've actually like seen a ghost and been afraid, or felt something and been afraid. I've gotten shivers and I've gotten
Hmm.
fearful, but most of the time, the real like panic, it comes almost too late. Maybe that's a survival, you know, a survival skill. But a lot of times it's just almost so unreal that your brain doesn't have a place to like make sense of it. And so you just kind of go with it, which is why I think that children have, you know, this sort of natural ability to just sort of accept and process the supernatural world. They'll see something and, you know, they are not old enough to say there's no way that that could be there.
Sure.
So there's, you know, kind of it's just kind of accepted, and there's
Hmm.
not necessarily this big fear. Not to say that there aren't terrifying things out there, and you know, negative entities and all manner of like. I mean, I love to hear about and read about and write about hauntings of all varieties. But I think for me personally, there's just now I'm gonna not be able to sleep tonight, of course, because I've been boasting that I don't get afraid.
Well, you see, I must share something with you in the Exonation. You were a lot more fortunate than I was as a child because I had an Uncle Joe, and he was my godfather, and you know we lost him last year. And well, we didn't lose him. We know where he is. He passed, I should say. And when I was a kid, you know, he the greatest guy. I always felt as if I had two fathers, my dad and my Uncle Joe. He was a policeman, and he used to come off some strange shifts, and he used to love it when it was thunder and lightning outside, and he'd come and visit, and he'd put a sheet over his head and come charging into our bedrooms as a ghost. Scared the hell out of us. You know? And I'm telling you, I think I've got PTSD from those experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but he just scared the hell out of us. And then you've got the typical campfire, you know, and he could tell stories like no one else. You know, and I'll just close off with this little story. You know, we used to go over to Uncle Joe and Aunt Barbara's for supper, and Uncle Joe, like I said, a storyteller. He was a great musician, a great joke teller, just a super guy. Anyway, he was, you know, he'd tell us these war stories about how he was a gunner on one of these ships, and he would fight off the Japanese with an ACAC gun and splash, right? So finally, you learn something called geography in school. You see, and he says, "Yeah, there we were crossing the Atlantic and with these merchant ships, and there came the Japs." Excuse me, Uncle Joe. That's not where the Japanese were. You know, they were in the Pacific. And he looked for a second, and you could see the light go on over his head, and he says, that's what they wanted you to think. This coming from the same guy who'd scare the hell out of us when we were kids, you know? You know, and I often wonder if children who are encouraged to communicate with their special friends, their angels, their fairies, if they are enriched as they grow older, having had the encouragement by their parents, their family, and their friends to explore and communicate with what many of these children are told are nothing but their imaginary friends.
Right. And you have to be so careful with the, you know, I have a child now, and my husband and I have very different approaches to the monster under the bed theory.
Don't worry, it's my Uncle Joe.
So I found myself like hearing him say, "There's no such thing as monsters," and I beg to differ. You know, but you're not going to tell a child this at 2 a.m. when they've woken up. But there's certainly such thing as monsters. Yes. You know, let's not be rash here. Let's not go around telling the kid lies. So there's a fine balance. I actually worked with this really interesting woman for a while who she wrote a book, and now I can't remember the name of it. I believe I know her name is Karen Good, and she wrote a whole book about dealing with the paranormal with children and the way to approach it, and it was kind of an advice book for parents, because it actually does something, you know, when you completely dismiss or deny something that's quote unquote an imaginary friend or something that kids have seen, you are telling them that you don't believe what they're saying and that what they're saying is not valid. And so there's a certain way to approach that without causing them to not be able to tell you other things, or to be able to express to you, you know, the fears. Sometimes there is something visiting them. Sometimes there's other anxiety that's manifesting. And so she's a really interesting woman to work with. And this book is really good. Sorry, I can't remember the name of it, Karen, but her name is Karen Good. And it's all about just sort of how to approach, and it's all different ages. It's, you know, it's from when they're very, very little and they're having toddler nightmares. And, you know, you have to be careful. You don't go and elaborate and say, oh, well, you know, there's ghosts and ghosts wander around. You don't need to worry. I mean, you can tell them that in the light of day, but you don't go quite there. But it's the idea that you take what they say seriously and that you listen to them. And, you know, most of the time children don't have those filters, and very often they are having that experience, and they'll be the first one in the house to have that experience.
Scary times for children, and I don't believe in scaring children. Like my wife and I have 6 children. I never scared the hell out of them because I remember what it was like.
Right.
I think that we have one child who was talking about her special friends, her invisible friends, and instead of of foo-fooing it. We encouraged it. And like, how do we know that children, because they haven't been tainted or reprogrammed by society, really do not have the ability to see, hear, and communicate with something that we as adults can't visualize or can't communicate with? Like, it's not as if we don't lie to the kids as they're growing up or anything. You know, why should they doubt us? No.
Right. I mean, we tell them about Santa Claus, so I don't see why there's any reason we can't,
True.
listen to what they say they're seeing, or give them a lot more credit. And I can say, as personally, some of the first experiences I had, I was very young. One of the first times I remember seeing a ghost, I was 5, and I knew what I saw. And, so I know from that point of view as well, and try and remember that it was real. It was very real to me, and I saw it, and I wasn't scared of it, but I certainly didn't know what to make of it, and needed to talk it through with someone. And luckily, my mom, was open to that. She believed me, and that that made all the difference.
Once again, how can we say that we do not believe something that we have not experienced? That to me has never made sense.
Yeah, and I think there's so many things that we can learn from children in those situations, because they may be frightened, but their fear is on the surface. There's a lot of good, children might see very good spirits, or spirits that come and check on them, and sometimes it's relatives. And I know my sister has this man that appears in her house once in a while. She's never seen him. Both her daughters have seen him. And he's a very friendly guy, doesn't look like any relatives. No one can really place him, but he just appears and he smiles once in a while. It's like maybe it was his property once upon a time. And he's just checking on things and giving it the thumbs up and making sure everyone's okay. I mean, there's so much we don't know. And I tend to err on the side of belief most of the time.
Exo Nation, my very special guest this hour is Varla Ventura. Her website is varlaventura.net. She's the author of Book of the Bizarre, Freaky Facts and Strange Stories, Beyond Bizarre, Frightening Facts and Blood-Curdling True Tales. Must be some of my family in there. The Christmas Troll and Other Yuletide Stories, Natural Causes of Leprechaunthropy. What?
Lycanthropy. It's the disease that causes a person to become a werewolf.
Oh, I see. Okay. Why couldn't you just put that there? Oh, no, you got to make it hard for the guys in the radio. Well, I understand where you're coming from, young lady. The Vampire Tale, Among Mermaids, and then Banshees, Werewolves, Vampires, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and Other Creatures of the Night. No, I threw in Trump and Hillary in there, guys. No, she's a very serious lady.
Hey, you're lucky you're a Canadian.
Geez, this could bring up a whole new show.
Yeah, you should just call it that. Thank God I'm Canadian.
Well, it was pretty bad because there were a group of people in this who were not Americans, but did not like the fact that Americans and Canadians got along so well that they actually put a lot of negativity into some emails that they sent out claiming they were from Canadians. Like we can get ourselves into enough trouble. We don't need any help, guys. So, yeah. All right, X-Zone Nation, we'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X-Zone. Varla, great having you with us. Congratulations on all you're doing, and I look forward to talking to you on the other side about some of your books, especially the one about mermaids, because that's not a topic that is talked about very often, but it is a topic of great interest.
Thank you.
All right, stand by. And X-Zone Nation, if you'd like to send us an email, studio@xzoneradiotv.com on all social media sites. You all know the number. It is X-Zone Radio TV. and the website, xzoneradiotv.com. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break, talking more about the strange, the weird, the bizarre. Don't go away.
Welcome to the Stairway to Heaven, a weekly update on the ever-changing, high-frequency currents now bathing the planet and affecting us all. The source of vital information for the evolving human being. We're coming to you through the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. We can also be heard on TSOM Radio Network, www.tsomradionetwork.com. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. Turning up the fire. This week we'll be looking at the cause of the increasing frequency on our planet and how it's affecting us all. Bear with me while I wax scientific. At this time, there are scientifically proven galactic events impacting the planet, affecting the course of human life and evolution. They've been charted by many sciences, including the Mayan calendar, developed by Mayan practitioners who were both mathematician and shaman. The cyclic events are also reflected in astrological ages and the precession of equinoxes, as studied by both ancient and modern astrologers and astronomers. These galactic phenomena are being substantiated by the findings of modern-day scientists. Dr. Dmitriev, a Russian scientist, has observed increasing plasma on the leading edge of the sun's magnetic field. He believes this is the result of the sun's magnetic field moving into an area of the galaxy where the energy is more highly charged. The increase in charge is causing excitation of the plasma on the leading edge of the sun's heliosphere, instigating more plasma to form and resulting in more luminosity or brightness. The energy is also flowing into the sun, causing it to emit increased frequency along its ecliptic or equilateral plane and saturating interplanetary space. Dmitriev has observed our solar emissions are traveling more quickly, charging up the energy or frequency of the planets as their electromagnetic or toroidal fields interact with that of the sun. The increase in luminosity is impacting all of those on the planet as well. These times and influences have been prophesied by nearly every indigenous culture. Our sun cyclically passes through this particular portion of the galaxy. Yet it's been so long since we were last here, bathed in the high frequencies, that there's no memory or practical information to go on. We have only myths, prophecies, and legends to guide us. Frequency dictates reality. The ambient frequency of our planet is rapidly rising, resulting in an evolution of reality. In short, all the rules are changing. We can no longer take the events of the past and use them to predict the future, as our future has become unprecedented. So how are we to find our way in this shifting landscape? If we explore how the ancient peoples found guidance for over 50,000 years, we see they turned to their shaman. In times of great change, shaman attune themselves to the vibration of the earth and the stars in order to maintain balance with the ever-changing frequencies of the universe and access the information to be found therein. Now, I realize there's no longer a shaman on every corner. However, the increase in frequency is offering us as individuals an opportunity to evolve into our own inner knowing and authority. For this evolution to take place, we must process out personal imbalances the increased frequency is forcing to the surface. Many of us sense that something monumental is going to take place in our lifetimes, that we can make a difference. We came to make a difference. As Earth moves into ever-increasing light during these times of intense transformation, the evolving currents affect us all. Much is being revealed within as well as without. As a result, we're going through deep initiation, individually and en masse. Sometimes we can feel isolated in the process and lose perspective as to our place in the larger scheme of things. You're not alone. We are in this together. Because of the increase in frequencies, we now have the opportunity to turn these powerful currents into tools of healing and evolution rather than suffering and denial. For over 45 years, I've been steeped in the shamanic way. I'm the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Art School, a Colorado State certified occupational school of the shamanic arts. In teaching classes and working with private clients, I'm able to observe the shifting effects of the rising frequency. As a result, it's my honor and great privilege to be able to share insights into our evolution. This leading-edge information is generously granted through embracing my personal process and assisting my shamanic clients and students to do the same. Thank you so much for joining me, Wilda Wiyaka, on the Stairway to Heaven, where we provide updates on the energetic currents facilitating our evolution into conscious, powerful co-creators. Until next time, may you be blessed on your sacred path to wholeness. We are here. The time is now.
You've been listening to The Stairway to Heaven with author Wilda Wiyaka. Her latest books, So We're Still Here, Now What? Spiritual Evolution and Personal Empowerment in a New Era, and The Science of Magic of Mysteries Volume 1 can be found on Amazon.com or wherever fine books are sold. Wilda is also the host of the very popular radio show, The Science of Magic. Past innovative episodes can be found on her website at www.thescienceofmagic.net. For long-distance sessions with Wilda or for more information on her Path Home Shamanic Art School and their upcoming block of classes, visit www.findyourpathhome.com or call area code 303-775-3431. Gibbs A. Williams, Ph.D., is a practicing psychoanalyst, supervisor, researcher, and author in New York City. Much of his life has been dedicated to understanding nature and the uses of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. His radical and original non-Jungian, non-mystical, non-magical theory of synchronicities illuminates much of the fog surrounding this challenging and perplexing topic. His ideas and manners are fresh, presented in a style that is both entertaining and highly informative. He is also an expert on crisis intervention, specially focused on violence reduction for the police and citizens, mastering anxiety, frustration, and stress without the use of medication, and effectively preventing and treating heroin addiction. Dr. Williams can be contacted at his email address at gwwilliamsny11@aol.com or visit his website at www.drgibbswilliams.com.
This is Kevin Randall. For nearly 30 years, I have been investigating the case of the Roswell UFO. I have interviewed hundreds of people and stood on the crash site. Now in Roswell in the 21st century, I have reviewed dozens of hours of audio and videotaped interviews, examined hundreds of files that relate to the crash, and have returned to Roswell in an attempt to put all that information into the proper perspective. For the first time in Roswell in the 21st century, I have made a dispassionate reevaluation of all that material and provide a new look at what happened. This is a book that clears away all the clutter that has hidden the truth for so long, strips away the various lies that surround the case, exposes the Air Force attempts at cover-up, and found a core of solid information that tells us all where the case stands today. Roswell in the 21st century will be available in just a few weeks. For more information, please visit my website at www.kevinrandall.blogspot.com.
Welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My guest this hour is Varla Ventura. Her website is varlaventura.net. And Varla, can you share with us some of the stories that you have in Book of the Bizarre, Freaky Facts and Strange Stories? Ooh.
That was a real fun book to put together because I have always been sort of a lover of those Ripley's Believe It or Not books,
Right.
and some of those kind of, just collections of strange facts and odd history, and grew up reading those and loving those, and kind of, would memorize random facts and say them at parties during a lull in the conversation.
Yeah, that's when you say, hey, did you know that?
Yeah, exactly. So, have you heard? Have you heard about the law in Kentucky that prohibits anyone from dyeing their chicks. You can only dye up to 6 chicks, baby chickens, and then
Oh,
after that,
oh,
it's
oh! I,
against the
I,
law.
I see. Dye in color. Oh,
Yes,
okay. Because
yeah,
I'm saying, oh, geez,
it's against the law now.
it
It
is.
probably wasn't once. So there, just random things like that. And then someone, a good friend of mine said, it'd be really interesting to read a book, not just of trivia, but of
Hmm.
like bizarre trivia. And this light bulb kind of went on. I was like, oh, well, and I decided as I was working on it, I could include, there's an entire chapter of paranormal experiences that close friends of mine had that I had heard over the years, and I sort of re-interviewed them for the book. Also, my own experiences, haunted cemeteries, strange laws, and several very odd stories that are kind of, the truth is stranger than fiction.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah, and these are the kinds of things like you read if you read weird news. I mean,
Hmm.
once someone knows you're interested in this kind of thing, they'll start forwarding you all the articles and sending you newspaper clippings. But there's all kinds of things that you just kind of can't believe. For example, in San Francisco, and I was living in San Francisco at the time when I was working on this book, and actually spoke with several people who. Remembered this happening, and it was in the 70s, and this woman fell off of a cable car and sued the city of San Francisco, saying that the fall turned her into a nymphomaniac. And they settled. They gave her something like $19,000.
For falling and becoming a nymphomaniac.
Yeah, blamed the fall on the cable car. And there was another guy that tried to sue the devil in the state of Pennsylvania. He wanted to sue Satan for his bad luck, and
Jesus.
and it was great because it was actually thrown out of court on the grounds that no one could prove that Satan lived in Pennsylvania.
That reminds me of Flip Wilson. Remember when he used to do that thing, Geraldine Jones, and the devil made her do it?
Yes, and
Yeah.
the devil made her do it. I mean, it's just things like that. Like, I mean, you can read these incredible stories and these incredible works of fiction, and you'll never find anything quite as ridiculous as that. And one of my all-time favorites,
Yes.
is the story about this guy who had his leg amputated from the knee down,
Hmm.
and for some reason kept the limb. Now, I'm not sure how it's possible that he kept this limb because, you're hard pressed to get like, a tooth that's extracted.
Exactly.
So he keeps this limb,
Uh-huh.
and for some reason he wraps it up and he puts it in a barbecue, and it goes into the storage unit that belongs to his mother. And his mother fails to make the payments on the storage unit. And so eventually it goes into default and it goes up to auction. Another guy comes along and buys, you just buy the contents of the storage unit.
Yeah.
You don't know what's in there. And so he buys the contents of the storage unit and he gets all the stuff, and, he takes it home. He's going through it. Storage Wars is a popular show now.
Yes,
It's like
yeah.
that kind of thing. This was several years ago. And he opens up the smoker, and he's like, okay, and it looks like there's some old wood in there, and he goes to clean it out, and he just sort of freaks out that this is not wood. This looks like it's a limb. And so he calls the police.
Oh my God.
Police come. They track down the woman, the owner of the storage unit, and it turns out that it's her son's, and he's not dead. He just kept onto it, and he claimed that he kept it for religious purposes. So this is all like completely bizarre, right? Like strange people cannot even conceptualize this. And then it turned out after I wrote the book, I found out that it went further, and they actually ended up they had to settle it in court because the person who won the contents in this auction and now owned the limb wouldn't give it back to the guy.
Oh, for goodness
and
sake.
said, I'll give it back to you for $5,000. So then they take it to court, but then they didn't just go to court, they went on court TV. And then that's kind of how the story came to be published again in the newspaper, sort of reminding people of the backstory of it. So, I mean, who does that?
Well, the same type of people who would go on to the Maury show to show how little class they have, and the lady slept with 45 different guys, and they're still trying to find the father. Or can you imagine this, saying to your husband, "Honey, I want a trip to Chicago, and we're going to see the Jerry Springer show." What the hell are you talking about?
Won't it be fun?
Oh yeah, yeah.
By the way, I'm actually a man.
It begs to ask the question: what is wrong with people?
Truly.
Yeah.
And that is why you need not fear the paranormal.
That's true. That is true.
When you hear that tap, tap, tap on your window, you better hope that it's a ghost.
Exactly. It's exactly. My dad had a saying, "You have nothing to fear from the dead, only from the living."
Exactly. And that's something, that's certainly going back to the cemeteries. That's something that, you kind of have that feeling when you're there. It's like, well, there's really, maybe there's like a bum sleeping over in the corner or something like that. But for the most part, you're alone, or you're with people who also want to be alone. And, and fears and cemeteries, actually, that's another one of my favorite stories from the Book of the Bizarre is the story of the Bateson revival device. And the Bateson revival device is something that is born out of something that many of us are very fearful of, being buried alive. Mm-hmm. And this was such a huge fear, especially during the sort of turn of the century, late 1800s, when it was early times. There were still graves were rampantly being robbed, and people were being misdiagnosed. And so there was this terrible fear that you would be buried alive. And so this guy invents, his name is Bateson, and he invented the Bateson revival device. And what it is it's a bell. Mm-hmm. And the bell is attached by a string that goes down through the ground and through a small hole in the coffin.
Yes.
And it's tied to the finger of the deceased person, so that should they wake up and find that they are entombed and are still alive, they can just, as long as they can wiggle their finger, they can ring this bell, and it will alert the caretaker. And actually, many very wealthy people were buried with these kind of foolproof devices, telephones in the crypts to say, "Hey, I'm actually not dead."
Thomas Edison did that. He invented a phone that was supposed to be used to communicate with the dead, or to be put into a coffin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, so, go ahead.
Can you just imagine getting a call?
What can you imagine walking through the cemetery, or maybe walking by the cemetery at night on your way home from, your late shift or something, and hearing the bell, and not, what do you do? Is it the wind? Is that, who do I alert? What is that?
Well,
that strange sound?
Do you start thinking about this after you regain consciousness from fainting?
Yeah. And then right. I mean, and there's all kinds of great stories, especially I read this wonderful book by a Scottish author, and there's all kinds of stories because, in Scotland especially, they were doing a lot of early medicine came from this era, mm-hmm. in which there was also a lot of grave robbing. And we know that there's no, it's no big secret that a lot of the early experiments and the ability to be able to dissect a cadaver was very.
It was important that they robbed the graves in order to get the specimens, in order to make the advances in medicine and learn how to be doctors.
Right. So there's a whole, of course, there's this, there's a whole dark history there. And, but one of the great stories is about this woman called Half-Hanged Maggie. Mm-hmm. And Half-Hanged Maggie was hanged for actually having an abortion, which was completely illegal. And this is probably 1600s. Mm-hmm. maybe early 1700s. So she's hung. This is totally terrible situation. And then she's hung for having an abortion, and she dies. They cut her down. They cart her off, and her relatives are all sad, and they're so sad that halfway, back to the village, they sort of park the cart and they go into the pub to have a drink and mourn poor half-hanged Maggie. Well, she wakes up and she comes to, and she doesn't like get up and walk into the pub and say, "Hey, where's mine?" But she comes to, and there's a passerby, and the passerby finds a physician, and they're able to sort of, help her and revive her. And she is eventually recuperates and goes on to live a long life. She has several children, and, her story just becomes this amazing legend.
Fact is stranger than fiction, and you are so right there, my dear friend.
It's true.
We have about 10 minutes this hour. Can we tell me about Among Mermaids?
Oh, yes. So, it's interesting because this is a book that is a combination of beautiful old stories about mermaids, the lore and legend of mermaids and mermaid-like creatures from around the world. And with all my books, I always like to put out a call for firsthand accounts. I like to include something from the people that are, have experienced things. And with both of the books of the Bazaar, I have several stories in there. In fact, some people who read the first book and then wrote to me and said, "Hey, I had this experience," and it was just this amazing story that they had that was either about coincidence or synchronicity, or maybe it was about, a ghost experience that they had had.
Yes.
But with mermaids, I kind of just kept putting that call out there. Anyone seen a mermaid? Anybody have anything to say about mermaids? And mermaids are one of those things that even people who believe in all manner of creatures and ghoulish things and strange things, mermaids are something that few people are loath to admit that they think are real, and yet they are one of the most beloved of these sort of magical creatures. They're universally loved and universally revered in many different cultures. So I did actually end up with a couple of stories from people. One was from these two sisters who are Aboriginal Australian, and they told their story and how their tribal group had been born from mermaids. And so they shared this beautiful story with me. And then another woman shared this paranormal experience she had where she saw something when she was staying in the Bahamas in this lovely little hacienda out over the sea, and this thing appeared in her room at night. And so there are a couple of stories like that. There's also the amazing Haneo, who are this incredible group of people who have the ability to see very, very well underwater, and who have trained themselves over generations and generations to be able to see very clearly. In fact, they have better eyesight underwater than they do above ground many times.
Wow.
So there's things like that. And then you just have all the wonderful Irish stories. And mermaids have a place in the realm of the fairy and in the realm of folklore. And they fit in with, the terrifying banshee and the sirens. They have this ability to lure you in and convince you to do something against your own will. But it's interesting because while they do have this very, very dark side, and they're certainly not all, singing beautiful songs with their lobster pal and things of that nature, they aren't necessarily inherently evil and out to get you. It's just sort of in their nature, much like the werewolf. They just sort of they take you down because they just love you so much, and they want you to be with them, and they don't always think, oh, you can't breathe underwater. But there is this sort of almost, it's an animalistic like quality.
I would be a lousy merman because I love lobster too much.
Oh no, you could eat. That's what you would eat.
Really?
You would be really happy, merman.
I had a guest on the show years ago, and he is a dolphin trainer. And he believes that the legend of the mermaids actually come from the early days of shipping, when the sailors were away from port for so long that they actually had sex with dolphins. Now, I didn't believe him.
Ooh.
But
that was a weird confession on his part that we don't want.
But
well,
and I asked him, I said, well, how do you know? He said, well, I've done the research, plus I've had sex with dolphins.
Like, dude, you TMI. But there is something to that. There is a lot of the early, especially the maps of the earlier explorers, and they show mermaid tails, where we now think that those were manatees and dugongs who are in the manatee family, and they have the same shape. Also, scurvy, plus many, many, many days at sea.
Yep.
And then, this like thing you see in the water is looking real good. And, the worst thing you could do in any situation like that as a sailor is go overboard. And so there's got to be a really good reason. But there's evidence that actually Blackbeard was, he's such a fierce and terrible pirate, but he would order his ships around certain areas that he believed were mermaid-infested waters. Well, he spent quite a bit of time along the coast of Florida, and there's tons of manatees in that area. So they probably were mermaid-infested in that way.
Knowing what we know today, thanks to science and all the other information that we are available to access at any time, I often wonder how the different books, the legends, the myths, the folklores, even the Bible would have been written if the events that created these legends, these folklores, these myths, as well as the events in the Bible, would have been witnessed today with the knowledge we know. Would they, in fact, have been part of our history?
Would we even notice them?
Exactly.
Oh, locust. No, it's fine. That happens all the time.
Yep.
They're just crop dusting next door. Like, we wouldn't even think about it.
Yep. Isn't that true? Listen, our time is up. We've got about 2 minutes left. I would love to have you back on the show again to discuss your other books. I have thoroughly enjoyed our hour together. So please come back and see us again. And let our listeners know where they can find out more about you and where they can buy your books.
Yes, well, thank you very much. It's been a lovely, lovely hour. You can visit me on my website, which is varlaventura.net. And I'm also on Facebook under Varla Ventura. And my books are available anywhere books are sold. You can go online. You can go to your local bookstore, and you should be able to order them. They're all in print. And I have a new book forthcoming. It's on the subject of fairies and fairy folklore, including pugas and changelings. And that will be coming out early next year. So I'll be posting information about that as it becomes available. I just finished the manuscript. So I would love to come back and discuss that with you.
We'll have to have you on before Christmas, because what I do is I bring on guests that I believe have books that would be ideal for Christmas, because I believe that we, the people of the XO Nation, and our guests like yourself, have so much to offer. And if we can help by giving our listeners some guest gift ideas, why not? And I think that you would be a perfect fit.
That's lovely, and I do have some stories about Scandinavian Christmas trolls, just to keep things in the spirit.
There you go. Thank you very much for joining us, Varla. A great pleasure, and to you and your family, blessings.
Thank you so much, Rob. Take care.
Bye-bye now. Before we go to the commercial break, XO Nation, I'd like to share something with you. I received a message from Carolyn Shield, who we had on the show last night. And she said, Rob, thanks so much for having me on your show last night. I want to give you some feedback. My book, Keys of Life, sold close to 800 copies on Wednesday, and my sales for Canada doubled, France doubled, and the United Kingdom and Australia doubled. You rock. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Carolyn. And if you'd like to become a guest on the show, all you have to do is send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. I'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue investigating the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Whatever you do, don't go away.